The order came sealed in crimson, a mark of command that no one in my position could refuse. To be chosen as an observer was supposed to be an honor, a recognition of clarity, precision, and a proven ability to watch without interfering. Yet when the message unfurled across my console, I felt no pride. The directive was simple: travel to the outer border and observe humans in battle. Report every detail, catalog every weakness, and prepare a transcript for the Imperial War Council. Disobedience was not an option, and so I bowed to duty, though unease coiled inside me like a parasite. Humans had always been a curiosity in our archives, bipedal predators with a fragile biology and an alarmingly short lifespan. Their technology was scavenged, their fleets crude compared to the armadas that ruled the core worlds. Analysts described them as restless, prone to irrationality, and dangerously emotional. That last quality was treated as a flaw by our strategists, who viewed emotion as an impediment to logic. But it was precisely that unpredictability that warranted this assignment. No simulation could predict how humans would act when pressed to the brink. To understand them, one had to watch them bleed. I departed with a small retinue, a vessel stripped of weapons, but fitted with the most sensitive instruments our science could offer. We traveled cloaked, silent, nothing more than shadows drifting along the outer rim of the designated battlefield. The conflict had been raging for months, humans against a species older and stronger, one of our long-standing rivals. It was a perfect chance to measure humanity's limits without drawing the blood of our own. My first sight of them unsettled me. Human warships were ugly, bristling with armor and scars of old battles. Where our vessels glided with elegance, theirs bore the brutal marks of patchwork repairs and improvisation. Hulls blackened with soot, plating welded at uneven angles, even entire sections replaced with captured enemy metal. They should not have flown at all, yet there they were, moving with a kind of brute determination that defied reason. The opening clash was swift. Enemy cruisers swept in with disciplined precision, their beams slicing through the void with the elegance of practiced killers. By all calculations, the humans should have broken. Their fleet was outgunned, outmaneuvered, their formation chaotic. But what happened next left me transfixed. Instead of retreating, the humans surged forward. Their ships twisted in jagged arcs, colliding with enemy formations in maneuvers that defied every tactical model I had ever studied. They fought like cornered beasts, turning vulnerability into trap after trap. A single human destroyer, engines ablaze and hull disintegrating, rammed headlong into a cruiser 3 times its size. Both vessels erupted in a storm of fire, but not before the destroyer released a payload at the last possible second, crippling 2 more ships caught in the blast. It was wasteful, suicidal, and utterly illogical, yet devastatingly effective. I remember staring at the display, unable to comprehend how being so fragile could twist death itself into a weapon. I began recording feverishly, detailing every tactic, every reckless maneuver. My assistants whispered their unease. They expected collapse, instead they saw escalation. Humans did not fight for survival in the sense we understood it. They fought with an abandon that suggested survival alone was not their aim. There was something deeper driving them, something primal, something I could not yet name. From within the command deck, I watched them laugh even as their ships burned. Transmissions intercepted from human channels revealed voices shouting with exhilaration, curses laced with humor, orders barked not with detachment but with passion. They mocked death as if it were an old friend. Their leaders did not issue commands from safety. They led charges from the front, risking annihilation with the same recklessness as their soldiers. No species of intelligence should have thrived this way, yet there they were, carving through the void with a fury that shook me. One moment seared itself into memory. A small human frigate, hopelessly surrounded, detonated its own reactor. The explosion engulfed 5 enemy ships, tearing open a gap in their lines. Through that gap, the human flagship surged, guns blazing, tearing into the enemy with maniacal ferocity. My hands tightened on the console. It was not victory, not yet, but it was proof of something the Council had failed to understand. These creatures would sacrifice anything, anyone, if it meant dragging their enemies down with them. When the battle lulled and wreckage drifted in silent clouds, I expected relief to wash over me. Instead, I felt an unease that made my bones ache. My people fought for strategy, for efficiency, for measured gains that could be predicted on a ledger. The humans fought for something I could not quantify, something messy and terrifying, something that made them stronger the closer they came to annihilation. I submitted my preliminary report that cycle, but my words felt hollow compared to the images burned into my mind. I was supposed to be an impartial witness, yet already the experience gnawed at me. This was only one battle, one fragment of their war, and already I could sense why so many had feared sending observers. Watching them too closely did not grant clarity. It invited dread. And so, as I drifted in the shadow of shattered fleets, I found myself whispering into the recorder what I dared not admit aloud. They should not exist, not like this. They were not soldiers in the way we understood soldiers. They were something else, something far more dangerous. I ended the report with words I had not meant to speak. I fear we have made a mistake in watching them. The transmission sealed, the battlefield quiet, and yet my unease did not fade. Instead, it deepened, a shadow stretching long into what I already suspected would be a nightmare without end. I had believed the first engagement to be an anomaly, a burst of desperation from a primitive race pressed beyond its limits. Yet as the cycles passed and more battles unfolded before my eyes, the truth grew impossible to deny. The humans did not simply endure war, they thrived within it. Each encounter revealed a layer of their nature I could neither anticipate nor categorize, and the longer I watched, the less I trusted my own assumptions. Through the translucent panels of our observation deck, I studied their soldiers in closer detail. Intercepted transmissions, recovered visual feeds, and the few glimpses my instruments could capture of their carriers told a story that unsettled me more deeply than the violence of their ships. The humans carried themselves with a kind of reckless camaraderie that seemed alien to my very bones. Where my own people valued discipline in the form of silence and obedience, the humans filled their time with chatter, with laughter, even with arguments. In the hours before battle, they shared jokes laced with obscenity, spoke of family and memory, and even sang together in unison. The sound was jagged, raw, yet it bound them with a unity no military code could replicate. I found myself replaying one intercepted clip until my aides warned me of obsession. A squad huddled in the belly of a dropship, helmets resting at their knees, weapons checked and rechecked. One soldier, a female, her features marked with grime, spoke of a meal she would cook when the fight was done, describing spices and flavors unknown to me. Her squad laughed, teased her, promised they would hold her to it. When the ramp dropped and gunfire erupted, she was the first to leap into the blaze, a roar in her throat. Hours later, when I reviewed the aftermath, her name appeared among the dead. Yet her squad still repeated her promise over the channels, as if her words had outlived her flesh. It was then that I began to realize what drove them. Humans did not fight for commanders or empires. They fought for each other, for bonds woven in the fragile span of their lives, and it lent them a strength that strategy alone could not explain. Their irrationality, what our council dismissed as weakness, was the very foundation of their endurance. Grief hardened them instead of breaking them. Rage pushed them further instead of scattering them. Loyalty made them charge into fire when survival demanded retreat. I documented these observations with increasing urgency. I wrote of how humans turned emotion into fuel, how their leaders did not suppress chaos but shaped it into momentum. My language became less clinical with each report, more colored by unease. I no longer called them primitive. I no longer labeled them fragile. They were volatile, yes, but in that volatility lay something I feared to name aloud, resilience that bordered on the unnatural. My companions aboard the observation vessel grew restless. Some dismissed my conclusions as exaggeration born of fatigue. Others avoided the screens entirely, unwilling to watch beings who defied every calculation. One night cycle, an aide muttered that we should withdraw, that nothing good would come from staring too long into the furnace of human war. I silenced him with rank, but his words burrowed deep into me. Another engagement soon followed, and with it came proof that my instincts were not illusions. The humans were cornered at the edge of a barren system, their fleet fractured, their ground forces scattered across broken terrain. By logic, they should have been annihilated within hours. Instead, they adapted with frightening speed. Units that lost communication did not falter, they improvised. Squads cut off from supply raided enemy lines and turned stolen weapons against their foes. Engineers tore apart wreckage and rebuilt artillery in the mud. Even civilians, dragged from the ashes of cities, picked up rifles and fought with a ferocity that stunned me. I remember one sequence most vividly: a soldier with a shattered leg crawling across the battlefield, dragging a detonator toward an advancing machine. He knew he would not live long enough to see the explosion, yet he armed it with trembling hands and smiled through blood as it tore the enemy apart. The recording ended in static, but the image refused to leave me. I compared this to the methods of my own kind. When faced with overwhelming odds, we calculated the cost, weighed survival against loss, and withdrew if the equation favored retreat. To fight hopelessly was irrational, a waste of life and resource. Yet the humans turned hopelessness into a weapon, a spark that spread until their enemies recoiled in disbelief. Their logic was not ours, but it worked, and that terrified me more than the deaths themselves. As the wreckage of that battle drifted into silence, I sat before my console and whispered into my recorder. They should not endure this. No species should. My voice trembled, though I had not meant it to. I could sense something in the distance, something larger than this conflict alone. Humanity's resilience was not confined to one battle, nor to one war. It was a pattern, a truth woven into their nature, and if it continued unchecked, the galaxy itself would feel its weight. I closed the report with clinical phrasing, but the truth lingered in my mind. They were not beasts, not savages, not anomalies. They were something far worse, creatures who transformed their own fragility into strength, who wore mortality like armor. And though I tried to cling to detachment, I felt the shadow of inevitability pressing closer. The Council would not listen to warnings rooted in fear. They would demand numbers, probabilities, charts that proved humanity's limits. Yet how could I explain that their greatest power was the absence of limits, the refusal to accept them? I ended the cycle staring at the wreckage of ships still burning across the void, and for the first time since my assignment began, I felt the stirrings of regret deepen into something heavier. Watching them no longer felt like duty. It felt like trespass, as if by observing too closely I had invited something into myself that could not be removed. And still, I knew, this was only the beginning. The days bled into one another as the war dragged on, and with each battle the humans revealed something new, something more harrowing than before. I began to feel as though I were not an observer at all, but a trespasser in a realm not meant for my eyes. The Council had commanded me to record, to analyze, to reduce human conflict to patterns and probabilities. Yet what unfolded before me resisted every chart, every formula, every neat category. They were not simply fighting to survive, they were reshaping the very meaning of war. The decisive turning point came in a contested sector where three systems converged, a crossroad of trade routes and supply chains. The enemy had assembled a fleet so vast that even I, schooled in the grand histories of our conquests, felt a tremor of awe at the sight. Rows upon rows of warships blotted out the stars, each formation calculated with impeccable precision. Against them stood the humans, their fleet ragged and scarred, hulls patched with scavenged armor, engines coughing bursts of unstable light. By every measure, it was hopeless. By every calculation, they should have scattered like ash before a storm. Instead, they pressed forward. The first volleys ripped through their ships, fire blossoming in the void, metal shattering into tumbling debris. I expected panic. I expected collapse. What I saw instead was a grim cohesion that shook me. Humans did not flinch when their formations were torn apart. They bent, shifted, reformed with a fluidity that defied tactical models. Where one vessel fell, another surged into its place, as though each death had been anticipated, as though every loss was already woven into the shape of their resistance. And then came their leader. I had studied her transmissions before, catalogued her commands, noted her presence at the forefront of every campaign. A woman of middle years by their reckoning, scarred across her jaw, her voice rasping with the strain of 1,000 battles. She did not command from safety. She spoke from the bridge of a ship scarred nearly to ruin, each order delivered with a conviction that electrified her fleet. "Hold nothing back," she said in a transmission we intercepted, her tone carrying more weight than any rank. "If we are to die, let us die making the stars remember." Her words ignited them. I watched as the human fleet split into fragments, feigning collapse, then surged back in coordinated chaos. They drew the enemy inward, closer and closer, until the rival fleet's own numbers became a hindrance. It was reckless, suicidal, and brilliant. They turned their weakness into bait, their desperation into a snare. In one sequence, I saw entire squadrons sacrifice themselves simply to carve a path for a single frigate carrying a warhead far too volatile to be risked in normal combat. They knew it would never return. They knew the frigate's detonation would take hundreds of lives, including their own. And yet they escorted it with a determination that bordered on reverence, until at last it tore into the enemy's heart and detonated in a blaze that lit the void like a new star. My aides could no longer contain their horror. One collapsed at his station, muttering that these were not soldiers but abominations. Another begged me to shut the screens off, to spare us from the sight of such madness. I silenced them, though my own chest felt heavy with dread. I could not look away. I had been ordered to witness, and now I was chained to the spectacle. The enemy faltered, not from numbers but from disbelief. No species in known history had fought this way, turning death itself into strategy, wielding sacrifice as though it were a blade sharper than any weapon. Their morale cracked as the humans pressed harder, laughter and screams echoing across intercepted channels. It was not the laughter of joy, nor of madness, but something darker, the exultation of predators who had found their rhythm. By the battle's end, the humans had done the unthinkable. They shattered a fleet that should have drowned them in fire, leaving the void littered with twisted metal and drifting corpses. Their own losses were catastrophic, yet their survivors raised their voices in triumph, swearing vengeance for the fallen, promising to carry their memory into the next battle. They did not mourn as we mourn. They did not grieve as we grieved. They transmuted loss into fuel, into an inexhaustible hunger that carried them forward. I stared at the aftermath, and for the first time, I felt something beyond unease. I felt fear, not of their weapons, crude though they were, nor of their numbers, which were meager compared to the great empires. I feared their will, the terrible refusal to yield, the ability to turn despair into victory. I understood then why no simulation could capture them, why no calculation could predict them. They were chaos made flesh, and chaos was undefeatable because it did not obey rules. In the quiet that followed, as wreckage drifted and fire dimmed, I recorded my impressions with a voice that shook despite my effort to steady it. They are storms, I whispered. They are not bound by the equations that govern war. They break every law of logic, and yet they prevail. They frighten me more than any fleet, more than any weapon my people have ever devised. When I sealed the report, I did not feel relief. Instead, I felt the weight of inevitability pressing upon me, heavier than before. This was no isolated battle. This was a harbinger. I had seen humanity not at its weakest, but at its truest, and I knew with a clarity that burned in my chest, they would not stop. And though I did not yet have the courage to write it, I felt the first whisper of a thought that chilled me. If they could break an empire with nothing but desperation, what would they do once they turned their eyes outward, once they grew strong enough to fight not merely for survival but for conquest? The question lingered like smoke in my mind, and I feared the answer would come sooner than any of us were prepared to face. The war did not end as wars were meant to. Battles usually resolve into silence, one side retreating, the other collapsing under the weight of defeat. But when the humans broke their enemy, there was no silence, no pause for mourning or reprieve. Their victory was raw, jagged, unrelenting, a momentum that did not fade but instead gathered strength as though every conquest fueled an appetite impossible to sate. I remained at my post, though each transmission scraped at my mind like claws. The humans rebuilt their fleets almost immediately, pulling wreckage from the void and welding it into new ships. Where my people would have required years to recover from such losses, they restored fighting strength within weeks. And they did not simply return to balance, they grew stronger. Every scar became a lesson. Every failure turned into a refinement of their tactics. They absorbed pain as though it were nourishment, and with each cycle their efficiency in destruction increased. Their leader, the scarred woman whose voice had electrified her fleet, did not step down after the victory. She rose higher, her name carried across comms with reverence. She spoke not of survival but of destiny, and her people listened. I intercepted her declarations, each one more chilling than the last. "We do not endure to preserve ourselves," she said once, her voice steady, her eyes alight with conviction. "We endure to claim the future." Her soldiers cheered, voices overlapping into a roar that rattled even the soundproof filters of my console. It was then that the full weight of my regret began to crystallize. The council had ordered me to watch, to record, to provide insight into humanity's limits. But what I saw had no limits. They did not plateau, did not settle, did not accept. They clawed upward, dragging themselves from ruin into dominance. They had transformed war from a tool of necessity into a way of being, a constant forge that tempered them sharper with every strike. I tried to make the council see. I dispatched report after report, my language fraying into pleas. I abandoned detachment, writing not with the cold neutrality of a scholar, but with the urgency of one who has glimpsed catastrophe. "Do not provoke them," I wrote. "Do not underestimate them. Every victory we grant them, every chance we allow them to fight, makes them stronger. They are not stable. They are not safe. They are becoming something we will not be able to contain." The responses came back dismissive, their tone one of superiority wrapped in ignorance. "They are savages," one reply stated. "They are unsustainable. Let them bleed themselves dry. Their ferocity will devour them long before it threatens us." I wanted to scream at the transmission, to shake those who sat in judgment, to force them to see what I had seen. But my words could not carry the weight of the images burned into me. The man with shattered legs dragging a detonator through the mud, the frigate escorted into certain annihilation by comrades who smiled as they died, the laughter on open comms as entire fleets turned into firestorms. I began to dream of them. Even when the screens dimmed, I saw their faces etched into the dark, eyes alight with something primal, mouths twisted into roars or grins. They haunted me, not as enemies, but as inevitabilities. I understood now why the council had hesitated to send observers, why so many before me had been lost in silence. To watch the humans too closely was to let them seep into you, to replace your certainty with dread. The final battle I observed was not the largest, nor the bloodiest, but it was the one that left me trembling beyond repair. The enemy had rallied for a desperate stand, gathering what remained of their fractured empire into a single defensive line. They built fortresses around a planet swollen with refugees, drawing every ship they had into a bulwark of survival. By any sane measure, the humans should have hesitated. The cost of taking such a system would be catastrophic. They did not hesitate. They struck with a fury that shattered defenses piece by piece, every sacrifice met with another push. The planet's surface burned as ground forces clashed, cities reduced to ash under bombardments. I watched the humans press forward even as their numbers dwindled, their voices over comms steady, unbroken, resolute. They did not falter, did not despair. When at last the planet's defenses crumbled, they did not pause to count the cost. They raised their banners in the ruins and declared victory, not with relief, but with triumph. I could not speak for hours afterward. My aides tried to rouse me, but I sat silent, staring at the devastation with hollow eyes. The realization had settled fully upon me. This was not the end of a war. This was the beginning of something larger, something far darker. Humanity had tasted empire, and they would not stop. When I finally activated the recorder, my voice broke. I regret watching them, I confessed. I regret seeing what they are capable of. For now I understand that they cannot be measured by charts or simulations. They cannot be bound by fear or by reason. They will spread, because that is their nature. They will devour every challenge until there are no more left, and then they will turn their eyes farther still. I sealed the report with hands that trembled, knowing it would be ignored, knowing my words would vanish into archives unread. But I also knew the truth would not need my voice to be heard. It would announce itself in fire, in conquest, in the rising shadow of a species that did not know how to stop. As I sat alone in the darkened deck, the silence around me felt like a lie. I could almost hear them, even across the void, their voices rising from countless battlefields, promising each other survival, vengeance, victory. And I realized with a chill that regret was not enough. Regret was a wound that could not heal. For I had not only watched them, I had understood them. And once understood, they could never be forgotten. That was the true punishment of my assignment. Not the danger of discovery, nor the burden of reporting. It was the knowledge that I had glimpsed the future, and it wore a human face. I should have turned away. After sealing my final report, I should have shut down the consoles, locked the archive, and consigned the humans to the abyss of memory. But the truth has its own gravity, and I found myself returning to the transmissions like a moth circling fire. Every new battle, every intercepted communique, dragged me deeper into a revelation I could neither resist nor endure. I was no longer an impartial witness. I was a captive of the very species I had been ordered to study. The humans did not rest. Where other empires would pause to consolidate, to rebuild, they advanced with a hunger that made the void itself seem too small for them. Their fleets spread into neighboring systems, striking with the same reckless audacity that had defined their earliest engagements. I watched them dismantle one fortress after another, each conquest adding to their arsenal, each enemy's ruin feeding their inexhaustible momentum. What unsettled me most was not the victories themselves but the speed with which they absorbed the conquered. Where my people would have spent generations reshaping a captured world, the humans folded it into their war machine within months. Refugees became soldiers. Factories became foundries. Pain became fuel. Their leader remained the same, scarred jaw, voice like stone ground against steel. By now her face had become a symbol etched across banners and ships, invoked with a fervor that bordered on devotion. Yet what chilled me was not her charisma, but her clarity. I intercepted one address delivered to her commanders after a decisive campaign. "We are not survivors," she told them. "We are contenders. The galaxy belongs to those who dare to seize it, and I will not see us denied." Her words were not shouted, not drenched in fury, but spoken with the calm certainty of inevitability. That certainty spread like contagion. Even in defeat, her soldiers repeated her lines, as though they had become scripture. I began to notice changes in myself. When I replayed their transmissions, I felt the faint stirrings of admiration, a dangerous echo that warred with my fae. My own people prized order, balance, the stability of tradition. The humans had none of these, and yet they carved their future with a will that no order could withstand. Part of me longed to turn away, but another part whispered of a forbidden question. What if their way was stronger? What if survival was never meant to be orderly at all? My aides saw the shift in me and grew afraid. One by one they distanced themselves, until silence reigned across the observation deck. Some asked for reassignment. Others retreated into their quarters and refused to return. I did not stop them. It was better they flee than share the burden of what I was becoming. In truth, I no longer trusted myself to remain untouched. The council, of course, continued to ignore every warning. They dismissed my reports as exaggerations, my language as compromised. An observer must not succumb to spectacle, one directive scolded. Maintain objectivity. Objectivity? I wanted to tear the words from the screen. How does one remain objective while staring into the face of a storm? How does one quantify a fire that grows stronger the more fuel you hurl into it? They demanded charts, projections, statistical assurances. But I could give them none. The humans defied prediction itself. The decisive moment came in the invasion of a border world, once a proud outpost of their ancient enemy, now reduced to rubble. The defenders had dug trenches across its deserts, raised fortifications of steel and stone, prepared to sell every grain of sand with blood. I knew the humans would not retreat, but even I expected hesitation. The cost of taking the world should have been too steep. And yet, without pause, they descended. What followed was slaughter that blurred the line between courage and madness. Human infantry poured into the trenches, bayonets flashing, grenades clutched in blooded hands. They fought not as individuals but as a tide, every fallen soldier replaced by another, every gap filled before it could widen. I watched as they crawled across minefields, disarmed traps with their own bodies, and stormed bunkers with fire in their eyes. Their voices rang across the comms, shouts, curses, cries of defiance that twisted even death into defiance. By the time the fortress fell, the sands were black with ash, and still they pressed forward, chanting their leader's name as though it alone could drive them. I could not look away. My recorder captured every detail, every scream, every act of will that turned ruin into triumph. But when I played it back, I felt something far worse than fear. I felt inevitability. The humans had crossed a threshold from which they would never retreat. They had tasted not just survival, not just victory, but dominion. And once tasted, such a hunger would never fade. That night cycle, as I sat alone before the darkened panels, I realized the true nature of my regret. It was not simply that I had watched them. It was that I had understood them. I had seen how their grief became resolve, how their weakness became weapon, how their mortality became their greatest strength. And in understanding them, I had glimpsed the future, one where their banners spread across stars, one where their voices drowned out all others. I whispered into the silence, though no one was left to hear me. We cannot stop them. No empire can. They will grow, and they will claim, and they will not rest until the galaxy itself bends to their will. My voice broke then, for I knew I spoke not as an observer, but as a witness to inevitability. I ended the cycle with my hands trembling, unable to decide whether to send another report or consign my words to silence. But deep down, I knew it no longer mattered. The Council would not believe until the fire reached their own borders, until human fleets darkened their skies. By then, it would be too late. And so I sat in the dark, haunted by the sound of human voices carried across the void, shouting, laughing, roaring in triumph. They were not echoes anymore. They were omens. And though I told myself I regretted ever watching them, I understood the truth I dared not confess. Regret would not save us. Nothing would. The chamber was silent when I entered, its vaulted ceiling draped in banners older than my species' recorded history. The council had convened in full, their forms arranged in a semicircle that seemed designed to intimidate. They did not rise, nor acknowledge my bow. Their eyes, cold as carved stone, fixed on me as though I were a contagion brought into their sanctum. I had expected skepticism, perhaps derision, but not the suffocating weight of disdain that pressed upon me now. You speak of humans as if they are more than they are, one elder finally said, his voice a dry whisper that carried like a blade. Primitive bipeds clinging to chaos. Their victories are an anomaly, a flicker before extinction. Others nodded, their expressions unyielding. I had seen them dismiss a dozen warnings before, but this time their certainty felt like willful blindness. I forced myself to stand tall, though the tremor in my limbs betrayed me. You mistake them, honored council. Their chaos is not weakness. It is their weapon. They bend calamity into strength. They do not break when struck, they sharpen. I have seen them turn ruin into conquest, death into doctrine. If we persist in ignoring them, we will not merely lose battles. We will lose the age itself. Murmurs spread across the chamber. A few leaned forward, interest flickering behind their guarded expressions, but most recoiled as though my words carried infection. The eldest among them raised a withered hand. Enough. Your reports reek of compromise. You were sent to observe, not to admire. Perhaps proximity has clouded your judgment. His words stung, for they echoed the fear I had tried to suppress. Proximity had clouded me, but not with admiration. With truth. The council deliberated, voices rising like a storm barely contained. When the eldest spoke again, the verdict was as inevitable as it was damning. Your observations are tainted. You are relieved of duty. You will be sequestered until we determine the full extent of your contamination. Guards stepped forward, their polished armor reflecting the flicker of the chamber's lights. I should have resisted. I should have argued, pleaded, anything to appease their arrogance. But as their hands gripped my arms and led me away, I felt a hollow calm settle over me. It no longer mattered. My words had failed, as I had known they would. The council was not ready to believe, and belief would come only with fire at their gates. In my confinement, silence became my companion. No transmissions, no consoles, only the echo of my own breath against stone walls. Yet even here, I could not escape the humans. Their images burned behind my eyes, the scarred leaders' calm defiance, the soldiers who laughed through pain, the relentless tide that consumed worlds. I tried to bury them in the dark, but memory is not so easily smothered. It grew louder, until the stillness itself seemed to reverberate with human voices. On the seventh cycle, a faint vibration shook the walls. At first I thought it imagination, the tricks of an unsettled mind. But then came another, sharper, followed by the distant thrum of alarms. I froze, listening as the sounds grew, a chorus of shouts, the deep thunder of impacts, the unmistakable rhythm of war. My heart clenched with realization before I dared to name it. They had arrived. The guards burst into my cell, faces pale beneath their helmets. One seized my arm, dragging me into the corridor. "Come," he snapped, though his voice wavered. "We are evacuating." Around us, the fortress trembled as though the very foundations were under siege. For a moment, panic drowned even the council's authority. The mighty citadel, unchallenged for centuries, was crumbling under the storm I had foretold. As they led me through the chaos, I glimpsed fragments of the assault, flashes of fire through shattered windows, the unmistakable silhouette of human ships breaking the sky. Their arrival was not stealthy nor hesitant. It was declaration, a proclamation that they had come to collect the future. I felt no triumph in my vindication, only the suffocating weight of inevitability. We reached a hangar where transports waited, engines roaring. The council clustered there, their composure unraveling at last. The eldest stood at the forefront, his voice straining to command order. Yet when the walls shook again, and the light of burning skies flooded the chamber, even he faltered. In that instant, I saw the truth on his face, fear, raw and intempered. The guard shoved me toward a transport, but I stopped at the threshold. My gaze turned upward, past the chaos, past the fleeing council, to the sky ablaze with human fire. And for the first time, I felt no regret. Not for watching them, not for understanding them. The regret that haunted me all this time had been a mask, a futile attempt to resist the truth. What I felt now was something colder, sharper, and far more honest, acceptance. The humans had come, as I had known they would. The age was theirs now. And as the engines roared to carry us into uncertain exile, I whispered the words I once feared to speak. They are not the anomaly. We are. The ship lifted, carrying us into the storm, and I knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning, and the galaxy would never again belong to those who had sat in judgment. It would belong to those who dared to seize it. The humans.